Everybody, we are here with Mr. Jason Graves. He's the composer of the new game, The Dark Pictures, Little Hope. It's on PS4, Xbox One, PC Digital. It came out October 30th of last year. And we are super excited to talk to you. Jason, how are you?
I'm doing great, Norman. How about you?
I'm well. I'm well. It's been a crazy day, but now I get to sit down and talk music with you, and I'm excited. Um,
Okay,
so
before we start, I
yeah,
have to put a huge caveat up because I think we need to recognize the fact that you've got a shirt, first of all, that says horror, and we're talking about scary music. And not only is my name Jason, but your name is Norman. So you've got Norman Bates and Jason
yeah,
together again at last.
and I mean, I think it was destined to occur. Really, it's a crossover that needs to happen and is happening right now.
Yes, as we speak.
This week.
Okay, with
Oh
that
my
being said,
God,
yeah.
amazing. Okay, so tell me about the Dark Pictures Little Hope. What's the story? What's the setting? What's it all about?
Okay, it's a predecessor to a previous game that this developer made, which was called Man of Medan. And Man of Medan is sort of a spiritual sequel to another game called Until Dawn. So these are all from the same developer. And
Okay.
the only reason I mention Man of Medan and Until Dawn is I've worked on all three of these games with Supermassive, who are amazing,
Hmm.
and we've sort of been perfecting this kind of cinematic experience for horror. So it's not like a standard third person shooter kind of perspective. It's more about being immersed and making decisions, lots of dialogue, developing characters, and most importantly, lots of different ways that the game can play out. You are by no means on any kind of rails. Any person in the game of who you have the chance to play from their perspective as you walk through, any person can die. And even with Little Hope, they've taken it a step further, and there are like completely different aspects of the game that you get depending on the conversations you have based on the choices that you make. It's not just, do I go into the scary house or do I walk down the foggy road? It's, how do I respond to this person's criticizing my character for being not scared enough, or not whatever. You make these decisions, and it really does change things up for the game, which is very, very cool. It's literally like a choose your own adventure, the old little books that I
Yeah,
used to
yeah.
read as a kid.
Oh my God. I still have a few old copies. The Survival at Sea is the
I
one
love them.
was my first one.
Oh,
Yeah, remember? So,
yeah.
it's really interesting you bring that up because okay, I can't wrap my head around because how you would compose for a video game that has so many variables. Like, how do you even begin that process? I mean, how does it
it's
go?
it's definitely like, it's not as well, I shouldn't say it's not as impossible as it sounds. I always feel like it's impossible at the beginning, but I've been working with these guys for such a long time now, and we've got a pretty good system worked out where the music is really detailing more of either sort of the atmosphere of your location,
Mhm.
or kind of the general gameplay state. So it can be very up in the air, and I give Supermassive like all the pieces so they can sort of assemble them how they need depending on the gameplay. So it's literally, you take 90 minutes of music, let's say I write 90 minutes of music, that's extrapolated probably into 9+ hours of music in the game. It'd be like, if Norman, if you said, hey, give me a supreme pizza, and I said, okay, here's your flour, and here's your water, and here's your pepperoni, and here's your green onions. And I gave you all the independent pieces. And then you basically were allowed to assemble the pizza kind of any way you wanted to. That's the most basic correlation I get with how I deliver the music to them for them to implement in the game.
Okay, so like you would give them the audio building blocks uh, that they would use to kind of score uh, the game as they're programming, as they're building the scenes and such. I mean, is there like,
Exactly.
is there like when you're building those, is there like maybe stingers or cues, but then there's also drones that kind of, you know,
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a lot of like, so for an example would be if you're just exploring, let's say,
mhm,
and we know that this is going to be exploring at the beginning of the game,
mhm,
so you haven't quite discovered anything yet, so it's not super scary, it's more like mysterious and dark and brooding.
mhm.
There would be a very specific piece for that, because there'd be another piece for maybe if you're exploring a little later in the game, definitely a different piece if you're exploring at the very end of the game. And then every one of those little pieces of pepperoni or green pepper is kind of its own like secret sauce. So like you
Or
said, one would
pineapple.
be
I
a
argue that
drone,
pineapple
right?
is on
Or
pizza.
pineapple. Yeah, I agree. Totally. I'm a pineapple person as
I'm fine
well.
with it.
So anything can kind of like stand on its own. Like you could play just that pineapple stem and it would have its own little thing going on.
Mm,
And a lot of times it's like a 50-50 split between um, the guys making the game, grabbing specific things from me and sort of baking them into their own little single slice of pizza. And they say, this is what we want the music to do right here. But then in another instant, because maybe there's a shift in the dialogue, they'll have the 3 or 4 elements completely on their own, where they're moving in and out of the space in the game, like being turned up and down, kind of depending on some of these decisions and how the gameplay is being affected. So it's like maybe there's 4 or 5 different little tiny pieces of music playing, but you only hear one of them
mm,
until a decision is made and something gets tripped and then another one comes in, and it makes it feel very Hollywood scored, like
mhm.
you're walking down the hallway and you go around the corner and something else comes in with the music, and but it's doing it interactively, which is what's so amazing. It's doing it in real time.
That's I can't it's that's amazing. I mean, it just it seems it's crazy to me. Like it seems like and because you've also composed for TV and for film, and it seems like
Sure.
that would be a relatively speaking, that would be a much more linear uh composition process, you know. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, do you have a preference? Do you like composing for the variable stuff, or do you like the linear nature of film and TV? Or
Yes. I like all of it. I think what I like is not doing the exact same thing all the time.
okay,
And if you made me choose between a specific medium, I would probably pick games, because it's not always how do we put together this interactive music puzzle and make it work with a variety of scenarios. There could be some of the bigger games. I did a game called Far Cry Primal that was very interactive. It was for Ubisoft, and it
mm,
had 2 or more hours of music. But then they also had, I think it was 3 hours of cinematics that needed music underneath them. And
ah,
those are the linear. They're basically mini movies. It's a little
yeah, yeah.
1 to 3 minute movie that plays in the game, and that needs to be scored from beginning to end. So you
Mhm.
kind of get the best of both worlds with games.
Yeah, the I can't like. Were there any times where you were listening, you were playing it, or you know, working some things out where you were like, "Oh my God, I never would have put those pieces together," you know?
All
But
the time,
yeah,
especially when I'm listening to the big picture, when I'm kind of writing the music. It's about how do these pieces interact with each other, and they need to be all playing at the same time and still not be a complete and total mess. It needs to sound like a full polished piece. And it's very rare that you have that kind of a mix in the game. Maybe if it's an action sequence and you're being chased, the music really comes front and center. But for a lot of stuff with these kind of games, it's more about the sparseness of the music. So I'll hear things on their own, or like you said, combined with one other thing. They're from the same piece of music, and I wrote the music, but it just it works on its own in a different way than me sitting in the room by myself just listening to the harp and celeste or whatever. You put in
Mhm.
the atmosphere and the sound design and the fog, and it just takes on a life of its own. It's very much all the time like, oh wow, I didn't realize that could do that, and that's really cool. It's like, it becomes greater than just the cue, because it's all about the experience.
Yeah, that's I super cool process. It was just when I was wrapping my head around it, I was like, how in the world does he? So like when you were creating the soundscape for Little Hope, how did you begin? This is a story set in modern times and in 17th century,
Mhm.
Salem witch trials. Um, where'd you go first?
Right to the 17th century immediately. I think um, one of the things that I try to do as a composer, especially if I'm brought on to another game with the same developer and we're doing the same sort of style, right? The last thing we want is for Little Hope to sound like Man of Medan, or for Man of Medan to sound like Until Dawn. So I'm going to lean as hard as I can into whatever aspects of the game make it really unique. What are the real special parts of this game? And of course, the time period, having something in a past very long ago time was my immediate draw. And I thought, well, what kind of music would they be recording back then? Not much. I mean, like piano, and they'd be singing. And maybe you'd have like some accordions or like some little hammered dulcimers or something.
Mm,
What else can I get that's a fiddle, very appropriate for the time period. And that was more or less what a lot of the score was based on, like live instruments, very sparse, recorded live,
mm,
not put into the computer. And you can shape everything to just be absolutely perfect now. I wanted it to sound like it came from then, and like to the extreme, like detuned and out of time and just kind of crunchy and creaky and old. And that was where probably 85% of the score ended up living in that kind of sonic space.
awesome. And i- in contrast, what does the modern day sound like? Is it a lot more polished, a lot more, smooth, smoother?
We actually had a decent conversation about that, about how to split the difference.
Hmm.
And in the end, I'm kind of circling back to your first question, but there was a lot of, well, when do we use the 1700 music versus like the modern day music? Um, because we need a lot of both to kind of cover everything. And I really like the idea of the old music playing, even if you're in the modern day, especially once you get about a third or halfway through the game, where you get a strong sense of what's going on with the story.
Mm,
And maybe it's a modern time, but you're hearing this old music. It's sort of like a flashback sort of thing, musically
mhm,
speaking. But that being said, we did have a prologue, which just didn't feel like it would work with the slow kind of creepy music. It needed to be like very modern, very big, very over the top, like big orchestra and choir and epic as we could get with horror. So I actually did that at the very end of the timeline. That's usually what ends up happening. Kind of the very beginning first impressions get really polished and put together at the end, because it's very important to have that front end of any game just really projecting the exact kind of thing that the developers are looking for. So we did that last, and
mhm,
I did that cue. It was I think I just called it prologue on the soundtrack, but it was underscoring this like 10 minutes of gameplay that literally opens the game. And it's sort of like, okay, yeah, I see what's going on. Like this is crazy and modern, and that way your ears sort of settle on that. And then when you hear the old music, it's like a complete 180. And that's
mhm.
sort of what you hear throughout the rest of the game until the very, very, very end. It gets back to a little more modern. But that was something that I thought was interesting. I didn't necessarily push the developers to do it, but they ended up more or less doing that. I think the prologue comes back in some places in the game, even in the old time period, when you're being chased or you're being hunted, because it has a really good drive and there's a good story reason that all these things musically connect the way they do. I can't give away too much because I don't want to spoil it all, but it is really smart and well thought out, and nothing that I would have been able to suggest. That's just the developers, knowing their project and being really good at implementing the music in an effective way.
That's very, very cool. You now going to your training, um, you studied under Jerry Goldsmith,
Yeah,
Elmer Bernstein, Christopher Young.
yeah.
Okay. First of all, mind blown. That's super cool. But
I agree.
I mean, like, who does that? But are there any takeaways from what you learned from them that you still reference like today?
Well, Christopher Young is if I'm doing anything with horror, I always go back and think of Chris, because he's, and still is, I'm sure, a very, very giving composer. And I was the guy in a class of 15 students, I guess. It was there 15 minutes early for every class, and I stayed 15 to 20 minutes late. I was the one asking so many questions. The professor's like, Jason, I've got to go to lunch. Let's continue this later. And it was the same thing with all the guest speakers or the teachers, like Chris and Elmer Bernstein and Jerry Goldsmith. And I don't know if it was my last name. Maybe I was just really enthusiastic and more so than some of the other students, but he really took me under his wing and gave me a bunch of his soundtracks that he wrote and the scores to them. And he also gave me Alien, the conductor score to Alien, which Jerry Goldsmith wrote. And he said something like, here you go, Jason, this is all you need to know about horror music. And it was the conductor score to like all 12 or so tracks of Alien, which that was pretty much my reaction. I didn't even know you could, have physical scores of things like that from movies from so long ago. And it's a much more regular thing now because people have them as PDFs and they share them and stuff. But this was in like 1995. So it was a really big deal. And my background was in sort of 20th century composition. So I think with Chris's class, our assignment was a scene from Hellraiser, I think. And he just really liked what I did. I did some 12-tone crazy serial thing. And he liked it because it was interesting, I think, maybe different from some of the other guys. He's just a cool dude.
That's awesome. You're totally lucky to have Alien. Come on. Anyway.
I know.
Okay, so
I know.
So what's next? What do you have coming up next?
Oh my gosh. So many things. Well, I'm still writing for Warframe, which is a really fun, ongoingly developed game by Digital Extremes. I'm one of the composers working for them, and it's not horror at all, which is great because it's like fighting robots, action, fun sci-fi kind of stuff. And of course, House of Ashes is coming out, I think around October, right? That's our next version. I think they just keep getting better, honestly. That's just right in time for October, for Halloween. And I've got another scary thing coming out that I don't think I'm allowed to talk about yet until it releases. I got to tell you, Norman, it's tricky with games because you can't really talk about it until it's out.
Yeah.
Right? It's like they did formally announce the sequel to this game I did called Moss, which is as far away from horror as you could possibly get. It's very pastoral and beautiful with live woodwinds and solo strings and like guitars and harp and celeste. So I'm having a lot of fun working on that. That's not coming out anytime soon, but yeah. And then of course other things that I unfortunately can't mention, but I'm very busy and very happy, and I don't think I'll ever get tired of writing music.
Oh, that's awesome. You're I was listening to some of the music from Little Hope, and it sounded a lot like I don't know, where are you located?
North Carolina.
Okay, it sounds a lot like an immersive theater production we have out here called Delusion. Um,
Oh, cool.
that is an immersive play, and they compose music for the different scenes that people are taken through, and it's very organic and very live. And so I was just like, oh my god, this sounds a lot like this video game music sounds a lot like what they would do for Delusion with a bunch of different moving parts and stuff. So good stuff.
That's really cool. That's really cool to hear, because it was definitely, it's if you're not a musician, it's hard to explain, but it can be very, very easy. I mean, you can have a laptop and just type some keys and compose music, and it's all segmented and perfect and everything's in tune. And to kind of do the opposite of that nowadays is actually really difficult. You sort of have to go back to like the 70s and pretend like you've got like an 8-track cassette
Mm.
recorder where you can't go and fix the pitch. You can't make it sound like it's right in time. And it was one of those, am I shooting myself in the foot sort of experiences for me, which I've found are my favorite projects once I'm finished with them.
Yeah,
When I'm working
once
on
you can
them,
look back and be like,
right,
oh, okay,
right,
that was a
yeah.
good one.
When I'm working on them, it's like, oh no, really? Is this gonna work? I got my daughter to sing. She sings the main theme. She's the female
Ah,
vocal for Little Hope. That was very cool. And then she also did, literally, I would just say, go like this, "Ooh," and she'd just do a little sound like that. And I used a lot of her sort of spooky effects and ran them through a bunch of like guitar pedals and things to either pitch them down or make them really slow, put a lot of reverb on them, make them sound like they were in this huge space.
mm.
And that's actually a lot of the ambient stuff that you hear. It might sound like just some kind of pitchy strings or something, but it's actually a lot is her vocal, and that's based
Ah,
around the creepy little girl that you have behind you with your backdrop.
you sh-
That little girl. That was
it's
that was
that
her
kid.
basically. Yeah.
Well, listen, I wish you the very best of luck on this game. I mean, it's obviously done well. And on your future compositions, I'd love to talk to you more when you can talk. Um,
Absolutely. That sounds great.
so yeah, again, congratulations, Jason. And everybody play the Dark Pictures Little Hope. P P PS4, Xbox One, PC Digital, and look out for the new one.
All the things. Yep.
What's all of the platforms? What and the new
Yep.
one's coming out? What's it called?
House of Ashes.
House of Ashes
It's
is
coming
coming out
out
in October.
sometime towards the end of October. Yeah.
See? So, I mean, come on, guys, get to playing. All right, Jason, thank you so much for taking the time. And look forward to talking to you again, man.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mr. Bates. We should talk soon for sure.
Yes, Mr. Voorhees, I think we should. Okay. All right, buddy. Take care. Thank you for talking to us.
You got it.
All right. Bye.